Everybody got the notes? Okay. There's the ones from last week if you need those. Did I get it too fast for you?
Could you go back?
There you go. You might want to get this one because it's got a little chart at the end of it that you might find interesting. Okay. I want to say that I am my own worst enemy, and this was one of those weeks that I put everything together and realized I didn't have everything that I needed, and then by the time I got finished, I said, what in the world did I do? But here we are. First off, I'd like to clarify a misstatement that I made last Sunday. You know, when I said that our Muslim friends said that Judas was the one that was crucified on the cross, well, that's not true. And the reason I say that is I went back and I looked, and what it comes down to is that, you know, Islam is kind of like Christianity. It's all busted up in different denominations. And there was one prominent group that says, yes, we think that's who it was, while the others say, no, it was someone else and other ideas. So to clarify that, if I still have it, the Quran says in 4:157, and for those saying we have killed the Messiah, Jesus the son of Mary, the messenger of God, in fact, they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it appeared to them as if they did. Indeed, those who differ about him are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it except the following of assumptions. Certainly, they did not kill him. So, now the question, you know, Islam is kind of interesting. It's kind of it's a circular argument. It's kind of like you ask them, is the Quran the book from God? They say, yes, it is. The Prophet Muhammad gave it to us. Well, they say, well, how do you know Prophet Muhammad is a prophet? Well, the Quran says that he is. Okay, so it's a circular reasoning. And I say all of that, you know, this kind of came up as a side thought, is that there's about 1.2, 1.5 billion Muslims in this world. Now, you may or may not ever come across one and have a study. But the thing is that when you look at that book and you compare it to the sayings that they say, they cannot justify the grounds based on what we're studying about the Messianic Prophecies, genealogies showing us who the Christ was. They just say the Quran is the book of God, the Prophet Muhammad gave it to us, and you know he's a prophet because the Quran says that he is. They also say, you have also believed who say Allah is the Messiah, the son of Mary. The meaning of that is it's a direct denial that Jesus is God. And they say the most merciful has begotten a son. You have come up with something monstrous, at which the heavens almost rupture and the earth splits and the mountains fall and crumble because they attribute a son to the most merciful. It is not fitting for the most merciful to have a son. Do not say, 3, desist. It is better for you. Allah is one God. He is far above having a son. He neither begets nor is born. So what they're saying is that Jesus is not the Son of God, but the only thing that he was a prophet, and that God does not have a son. So it's an interesting little book, and I thought I'd throw that out there to you because they make these statements, but yet they cannot prove the statements that they're making. And that's the important part of our Bible studies along this line of genealogy. So if you don't have a Quran and would like to get one, just get on the internet and just type in free Quran, and you'll find 2 or 3 websites that will send you one in the mail for free. So.
I don't want to be on that mailing list.
Well, it's not a mailing list.
It would be probably.
Well, I've gotten two of them. I figured that they're giving them away, and if I can get them, that keeps them out of the hands of somebody else. Now, I got the introduction in the wrong place. What we're going to be looking at tonight is prophecies concerning the descendant of prominent men, that is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah, or at least the tribe of Judah. How prophecies and genealogies eliminate all but one. Explain the differences in the genealogies of Matthew and Luke, and whether or not genealogies are important for us today. That's a load right there. So I'm going to be kind of going through some of the stuff that we've already talked about, just kind of jump over it, because I don't think it's important for us to rehash something that we're all familiar with. Get back over where I need to be. The prophecy of the son of Isaac, Genesis chapter 21, verse 12. Those in the back, if you can't read this, just tell me afterwards and I'll try to make adjustments. In Genesis 21:12, and God said to Abraham, let it not be grievous in your sight because of the lad, and because of the female slave, that is referring to Ishmael. He says, and all that Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac shall your seed be called. Now this is an interesting point, because before the birth of these children, these people, these two boys, God had told Abraham that in his seed the world would be blessed. Now Abraham has two children, and now God says this is the lineage that it's going to happen in. The other one is going to be there for your posterity, but the promise is going to go through Isaac. Now, we already noticed the Messiah was a descendant of Abraham. We know that the Messiah, that Abraham was the father of two sons, and the prophecy of one half of the lineage of Abraham has been removed by this statement that God had just made to him. It is going to be through Isaac that his promises will be fulfilled. Now, we see that fulfillment back in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1, when he talks about the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, and it says Abraham begat Isaac. We see that stated there, and it's shown in the genealogy. Matthew proves the lineage of Jesus by first stating that he was the son of David, and then Abraham, and then saying that Abraham was Isaac. So we see the promise being fulfilled by God up to this point in Abraham's life. Now, what it does, and this is what we're going to get into a little bit later here, is it shows a narrowing path. If you kind of see where we're at right now, we're going to see how it kind of narrows down. It's kind of like a funnel. You got a lot of stuff up top, but when it comes down, you know, it's like rolling marbles down one of these marble things, and when it comes out, only one marble hits the ground. And that's what we see in these genealogies. At the beginning of this, God told Eve that the world would be, she would be the bringer forth of the Messiah, so to speak. He would bruise the head of Satan, and Satan would bruise his heel. So we see the promise that to Eve, and she's thinking, okay, one of my descendants is going to be this individual. Now we get to Abraham. Now it's narrowed it down out of everybody in the world to a single family. Now Abraham is thinking, I've got two sons. How's this going to work? God has told him, now we're going to go through Isaac. So you see how it's kind of taken the big promise, and now God is beginning to narrow it down to a path. But we're going to follow that path to the end. The son of Jacob. Now, when we look in Genesis chapter 8, 13, and 14, Numbers 24 and 17, we see the promise that God made to Jacob. He said, I am the Lord God, the God of your father Abraham, and the father of Isaac. That's where the promise went through. And in you and all of your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now, Jacob had 12 sons. No, had 2 sons. No, Jacob. Jacob and Esau. Jacob had 2 sons. Jacob, I'm getting confused here. I've got my mind going in too many different directions. We'll get to that in just a moment. But anyway, the second part of the prophecy says, in Numbers, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come forth from Jacob, and a scepter shall rise from Israel. Now, this kind of intertwines with what David did in his life, being a scepter in Israel, being a star of the nation itself, having brought the nation up to its greatest height, and having the surrounding nations showing obedience to them. That has an application there, but there's a couple of things in this particular statement that we'll see in just a moment that really doesn't apply to David himself, but looks forward to the coming of the Messiah. Now, the prophecy of the Numbers said that it would come through Jacob and that the star would come forth. God told Jacob that he would inherit the promise made to Abraham, and it would be through his descendants that the prophecy would be fulfilled. Isaac fathered twin sons. I knew he had two. It was Jacob and Esau. It was Jacob that had the 12 sons. I don't know why I keep getting Isaac and Jacob mixed up with those sons for some reason, but it happens. The prophecy in Genesis 28 says one half of the lineage of Isaac was eliminated. That was Esau. It was going to go through Isaac. See, I get confused here on my names. One half of the lineage was eliminated, and the lineage was going to go through Isaac, as far as the Messiah was concerned. Now, the generally held view of the star from Numbers chapter 24 and 17 speaks of David secondarily, but primarily of the Messiah. It indicates the ruler would be the son of Jacob. Now, the fulfillment of that is that we see that the son of Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham, the son of Tehor, the son of Nahor. We see that genealogical layout of Jacob's, the promise made to Jacob. Jacob, the son of Abraham. Isaac was the son of Abraham, and Jacob was the son of Isaac. So we see the genealogy laid out. Now, the star and the scepter being Christ himself, because that shows us a little bit about the nature of the scepter, and we'll talk about that shortly. Now, Luke's genealogy is different from Matthew's. It runs from Abraham, 42 generations. It runs backward from Jesus to Adam, 76 generations. And from Adam to David, the two generations are the same. So when you look at the two genealogies of Matthew and Luke, they're different in certain aspects, but they're the same, and they're backwards as far as the flow goes. Now, from David to Joseph, they are different except for two names: Zerubbabel and his father Shealtiel. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I should have looked this up. The two genealogies of Matthew and Mark intersect at Zerubbabel, and then they split out again. Now, the major difficulty is that these two different genealogies both are presented as a line of Joseph. When you look at the end of it, they say the son of Joseph in both cases. Now, that kind of creates a little bit of a problem, but when you look at it from the standpoint of how the Jews ran their genealogies, it was always the male of the household that is recognized, if that makes any sense. Follow it down, you'll see nothing but male people in there. There'll be occasionally, there'll be a reference to a woman, kind of like Boaz begat Obed of Rahab, indicating certain significant women. But the genealogy itself flows through the male heir. Now, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, there are several different explanations. They said some people say that one genealogy is giving the natural line of descent, and the other the legal line of descent. And that Joseph is a legal son and the heir of Heli, where it ends up at, but the real son of Jacob. That's a little bit confusing. I tend to follow this line of reasoning. He says that Joseph was the son-in-law of Heli, and that Luke was actually tracing the line of Mary. Now, if you were going to prove that Christ was Mary's son, and if you're listing all the males in the genealogy, then it would stand to reason that Mary's husband or betrothed would be the one listed in the genealogy. But in all actuality, the lineage falls through her. So the genealogies are traced by the males, and I'm trying to think that this is the proper way to think about it. Now, Luke was tracing the bloodline of Mary and Matthew, the legal line of Jesus. Now that's important. You gotta have the bloodline for the throne, but for the Jews, you gotta have the legality of right of heirship to that throne. So Matthew and Mark both fulfill that needed thing. Now concerning the tribe of Judah, Genesis chapter 49 and 10 says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Now we're told that the scepter shall not depart from Judah. Now the scepter is referring to the role of authority, and we'll see that in just a moment. But the important thing is that this particular statement in Genesis chapter 49:10 eliminates 11 of the 12 sons of Jacob. So you see the funneling effect? Now we're coming back down, we've eliminated part of the family that's coming through the household of Judah. Now, in later years, Judah would become the leading ruling tribe of the nation of Israel. Through him, David, Solomon, and ultimately Jesus, the family of David. So through Judah, we see the prominence of the nation with, I guess, their greatest king, David and Solomon. We see its downfall, but throughout the history of life, we come down eventually to Jesus himself. So we see the lineage going from taking the kind of a funneling effect here. Now, the meaning of the word Shiloh that we talked about earlier is used in the passage as rest. It's a condition of peace. In this case, the definition of the word is peacemaker. And according to older Jewish writings, including the Talmud, the view of the Messiah is the subject of this prophecy. They viewed this prophecy, the Jews understood this prophecy to refer to the Messiah itself. Shiloh meaning peace, peacemaker. They knew that the Messiah would come and grant peace to the nation of Israel. Now, another aspect of prophecy concerns the word scepter and the time of its removal. Now this, I really didn't think about this until I got to looking at it. But the scepter was going to remain in the hands of Judah, and it would stay there until the coming of the Messiah, and then it would be removed. Or it would be removed before the coming of the Messiah. And that's exactly what happened. The scepter in Genesis 49:10 is actually a word for tribal staff. In other words, they have the authority. It involved their identity, their judicial power, and that we even see that when they went off into captivity, that the nation of Judah, when they came back, Judah had the power. And when the scepter would depart from Judah, so would their judicial power. Now this is important to understand, because if they maintained the judicial power of the law of Moses, when the time Christ came, Christ would not have been crucified. Instead, he would have been stoned to death. That's very important to understand about the removal of this scepter. And it was stated so many, 1,500 years before it actually happened. So, in the book, Jesus Before the Sanhedrin, I told you to read that book? It makes this statement that the legal power of the Sanhedrin is restricted 23 years before the trial of Christ. And this is documented in the Talmud and in Josephus. That restriction was the loss of legal right to pass the sentence of death. And we see this in action in John chapter 18, verse 29, when the Jews were telling Pilate that they did not have the authority to carry out the death sentence. They had to have Rome's permission to do that. And actually Rome would have to be the one to do it. So if it was still lawful for the Jews to execute the sentence of death, Jesus would have died by stoning and not crucifixion. So now we see the importance of the prophecies, and we see the time frame in which it is beginning to happen. Their authority has been taken away from them. Christ comes onto the scene, and now he's going to die in a manner in which the law of Moses did not specify, and that the Jews could not carry out themselves. So it's a perfect time frame. When you think about it, perfect time frame. 40 years after the death of Jesus, Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed, all the records were destroyed. It eliminated any of the possibility of prophecies concerning the death of our Lord being fulfilled at a later date. They couldn't, it's like I said last week, God pretty much put a lid on the box. He said, that's it. Nothing is going to happen concerning the prophecies of the coming of the Messiah and what we've said about his life and eventually his death and resurrection. If he had been born 24 years earlier, he would have been killed by stoning. For the scepter would not have departed from Judah. Judah would still have their authority. This would have been removed the possibility of prophecies concerning the manner of his death being fulfilled. When they prophesied about how he was going to die, if they still had their judicial power, the prophecies would not have been fulfilled. God had it removed from them so that he could carry out his prophecies. Jesus came within the necessary period of time frame. It was really a period between 60 and 65 years. And when you look at the history of the Jewish nation, that's when the Messiah came, and it was a perfect fit. They lost their judicial power, the prophecies fulfilling the Christ happened, and then God brought everything to an end concerning the coming of the Messiah and his life and his death. And we see the fulfillment of that again, Matthew chapter 1 and 2, the father of Judah. And then when we see in Hebrews 7:14, he says that the Lord descended from Judah, a tribe reference to which Moses paid nothing concerning a priest. Christ is our high priest. He came from Judah. And because of that, there had to be a change of not only the law, but a change of the priesthood. It also required that because the priest of the law came from the tribe of Levi. And if Christ is a priest, then he would be a priest after the law of Levi, the tribe of Levi. But he was not, he was from the tribe of Judah. You see the necessity of what is important here. When God brought the old law to an end, he said, that is now done with. The new law is brought in. The covenant has been bought with the blood of Christ, and he is the high priest of that covenant after the law, after the priesthood of Melchizedek. Moses had been completely silent about men from the tribe of Judah being priests. Never said a word about it. As far as I can remember, he's never said a word that another tribe could be a member of the priesthood. And that tells us something about the silence of the scriptures. If anybody says, well, the Bible doesn't say that we can't do that, we'll just point to this and say, well, the old law didn't say anything about the tribe of Judah being a priest. It just didn't happen. So we see the convergence. I feel like I'm clicking on the intercom. One could easily say that since my lineage was the same as has the same ancestors, I am the one prophesied. That's a question all of us, I guess at one time or another, would say. Why didn't someone else stand up and say, well, since I'm from the tribe of Judah, my ancestors was Isaac, Jacob, Abraham, I could very easily be the one that was being prophesied. Now, once we look at all the prophetic requirements concerning the Messiah, and we look at the genealogical line of Christ himself, it all funnels down to one particular person. The Messiah's genealogy is not simply the line of David. It continues to narrow repeatedly over time. Now, there are a lot of Jews, people will say, that are descendants of David, but prophecy keeps tightening that little funnel as we speak. The narrowing path. When we look in Genesis chapter 3, the promise made to Eve, the seed of woman. Genesis 12, the seed of Abraham. You see how that kind of eliminates the rest of the world? Then Genesis 49, the tribe of Judah, that eliminates the other 11 brothers. Then he says, the house of David, that eliminates everybody else in the line in the house of Judah. He's now narrowed it down to a single family within that tribe. And then he says, and then we have a specific line, royal line, we have a non-royal line. And this is kind of important to know when you look at this, because there was a problem in one of these genealogies. The specific royal line was Solomon. That was where the royalty came from. And that was, I think, the lineage that required the individual to be born in. Then we had the non-royal line, but yet they maintained the authority or the right to heirship. And one line went through Solomon and the other line went through Nathan. And already we're beginning to see how that family's line has split up. Already that's not any Jew, but it's a very specific family tree. They split out, but yet they, after the return from captivity, they reunite Zerubbabel, and their promise is made that, I should have brought that one up too. The promise was made to him that the heir would come through him. The line splits out again. So it kind of gets around that problem that we talked about last Sunday concerning that no man would sit upon his throne anymore, which would indicate the end of the physical descendant of that particular part of the family tree from inheriting that throne. It gets around it by going through the line of David. Now the Messiah must meet both legal and biological parent requirements. Now here's where things get nearly impossible for anyone. The legal right to David's throne comes through Solomon's line, and it is required for kingship. Matthew's genealogy points that out. The biological descendant from David comes through Nathan's line, and it avoids the curse of Jeconiah, which is in Luke, which is recorded in Luke's genealogy. So no ordinary birth can satisfy both, because Solomon's line is cursed from ruling in Jerusalem, Jeremiah chapter 22 and verse 30. So now you see how it has really gotten to a narrow point towards the coming of the Messiah. How only a very few people could fit that. When you start out and thinking the promise of Eve to Abraham to Jacob, now we're coming down to a very narrow point. Nathan's line had no royal claim. Only the virgin birth allows both lines to converge. Legal right through Joseph and the physical descent through Mary. And this alone eliminates every historical candidate. That's the importance of this genealogy. Because now, even though Mary was betrothed to Joseph, they were not living together as husband and wife, so to speak. When the Holy Spirit brought the blessing upon Mary of bringing forth the Messiah, that eliminated the physical aspect of a father. Now she is now bearing the Son of God through her. So even though Joseph had the right of saying, I am a descendant of David, Mary also said, I have the right descendant to David. Now the virgin birth fits. And that is a culmination of the whole thing. So, you know, it's kind of interesting. I don't know how well I've explained this or how well you may have picked up on it, but it shows the providence of God at work at eliminating things, bringing things in, prophesying statements that were made before they were actually happened. And then when Jesus came upon the scene, he came at a particular time in which the Jews had no power to bring harm upon them according to the law of Moses, but the harm would have to come through the hands of the Gentiles, even though the Jews were responsible for his death. We see the prophecies being fulfilled in this one particular man. So that's where the convergence happens. It came before the genealogies was lost in AD 70, and this is a huge and overlooked thing, because genealogies were carefully preserved before AD 70, and they were destroyed when the fall of Jerusalem and the temple. So I said, get rid of the genealogies. It brings to the end God's work of prophetic statements and promises through family in the genealogies that was given. And as we said before, the genealogies was important because to the Jews, that dictated whether or not they had land rights, whether or not a certain particular family of the Levites could serve in the temple or they could not. it dictated a lot of things. And so they were very meticulous, careful about preserving that land. And in that preservation, I don't know if they really realized it or not, they were showing to themselves that the Messiah was coming and who it was going to be. And if they would have applied that to the prophecies, they would have spotted Christ without any problem. Now, after AD 70, no Jew can prove their tribal lineage, and no one today can prove descent from David. The Messiah must come with a scepter that has not departed from Judah. He arrives right on the predicted time, and anyone after him cannot even document the claim. So that's pretty much the end of the story of the genealogy concerning that. The place of birth and genealogy must align. Prophecy requires a descendant of David, born in Bethlehem, and specifically the city was called the city of David. He had to be a descendant of David. A Davidic born elsewhere fails. If you said, I'm of the line of David and I was born over here in Nazareth, well, you failed in the prophecy. The Bethlehem birth without Davidic descent fails. Prophecy of lineage and the place of birth has no flexibility. So you have to have both of them to line up together. Could the prophetic genealogy apply to someone other than Jesus? Only if they descended through David through two distinct lines, one legal, one biological, united through a virgin birth, that is the genealogical lines. All of this before AD 70, have been born in Bethlehem and been confirmed by God. And Jesus Christ is the only one that we know of that has been able to fit that perfectly. Messiah must be genealogically qualified and rejected by his own people. This matters because most Messianic claims tried to seize power. The prophet said the Messiah would be rejected, to be cut off, yet still be David's heir. And when you look at it, you really can't pick and choose which prophecies there are, as our author of the book says, that you want to apply to this particular case. Because it all has to fit. And all the prophecies have to converge within that time frame when Judah's authority was taken from them and before the genealogical records failed. So when you look at Jesus Christ and what happened in his life, it fits perfectly. So why study genealogies? We see the value and time space devoted to them. The early church genealogies played a role of great importance, and we get the idea of their significance when we question from the question that Jesus asked the Jews in Matthew. Remember when he said, who do you think of the Christ? Whose son is he? They told him, the son of David. They knew where he was coming from. He was going to come out of the line of David. Matthew begins his account by establishing that fact, by saying he was the son of David. This demonstrates the importance of Jesus' ancestry, especially in a gospel that was written for a Jewish audience. Luke's was written primarily for the Gentiles. And what this does is that the Jews could understand the coming of the Messiah, and the Gentiles could see that God was interested in universal interest and importance when he said all the nations of the world will be blessed through you. And when he takes it all the way back to Adam and Eve, he shows to them that even back then the promise was made that the Messiah would triumph over evil. And we see that today in Jesus, and it's proven beyond doubt. Now, he talks about the divisions of the genealogies, what Matthew was doing. I think this is stuff you can find in your book. But when I look at it, I kind of look at it from the standpoint that God chose humble beginnings for his king. You know, when the nation went up to its prominence and then it was destroyed and brought down to its bitterness of captivity, God did not want his son to come from someone that was rich and powerful. He didn't want to come from that kind of nation, because so many rulers come from that particular situation, riches and power and prominence. God chose humble beginnings to show that even in poverty and humility, in the nature in which Christ was born, And what he represented to the people was more important than what a rich man and a powerful man could do. The rich cannot identify with the poor, so to speak. They say they do, but they really can't. And that's a lesson that God was trying to point out to them. So I guess the question is, are genealogies needed in the church today? Paul makes two statements. Titus chapter 3 and verse 9, he says, avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels about the law, for they are unprofitable and worthless. Genealogies play no more part in the in the lives of Christians. It was important for the coming of Christ, but it is no longer important to us. He warns Titus against divisions in the church and the pointless debates that this brings about. He points out that genealogies foster pride, dispute, legalistic judgment that have no spiritual value. Timothy 1 and verse 4, he says, nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies which promote speculations rather than stewardship from God, that is by faith. He's instructing Timothy to keep the church focused on sound doctrines. Obsession over lineages and speculation of history distracts from the work that we need to do. It was there for the work that God needed to do to bring forth the Messiah, but it is no longer important and no longer necessary. Now, if you're just a person that likes to trace your family tree, no problem. I mean, that's just a hobby like anybody else would have. But it shows no particular importance. Now, I say that because I traced my tree back through a big genealogical site that the Mormons have. I'm a descendant from, I want to say it's King Edward II. It might have been the fourth. Doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't mean that I have a right to the throne over in England, but be that as it may. So what's the conclusion? Genealogies identify the prophetic lineage of Messiah. Old Testament prophecies of the exact lineage was fulfilled, and genealogies no longer play an important role in the church. We covered a lot of stuff, didn't we? You probably didn't retain much of it. Probably confused to no end. So I put this up here. Questions and comments to unclutter the confusion.
So Mary, tracing her genealogy back, was from the line of David also?
Yes. Both genealogies go through David. They split off, then they come back together after the return from Babylon, captivity, then they split off again. And one side of the genealogy circumvents the curse of Jeconiah, whereas the other one goes through it. The one that goes through it could not sit on the throne, but yet they had the right to David's lineage. The other one bypassed that and said, we now have the right to inherit the throne. So that's the importance of the two. Sunday morning, we'll look at chapter 3, pages 58 through 50. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope it was helpful.